I was recently reminded of my Come and See video as it received a beautiful comment from one Barry Moore, which was great timing considering what I had been viewing for a future upload. I recall how Cloud Landsman stated that actually attempting to understand the pathos of Adolf Hitler was adjacent to an unethical act in and of itself, and I was wondering to what degree it is considered vulgar, misguided, or grossly privileged to discuss the motivations of the men who make war. Discussing the thoughts and actions of military commanders, depending on the circumstances, can come across as barbaric callousness. Whilst understanding how and why American generals decided to try and halt either Axis offensive during the Second World War seemed benign by comparison, discussing strategy and tactics in regard to America's involvement in Indochina, a contrastly aggressive, overtly imperialistic affair, seems to be considered, I think correctly, tasteless and outright psychotic. Sometimes, trying to understand why Vladimir Putin is doing what he is doing comes across to me as disgusting sports talk, and one can potentially even go too far when discussing the personal idiosyncrasies of the Iraq War architects. How does an Iraqi viewer feel about the existence of the film Vice? Conversely, how would a Vietnamese viewer feel about the existence or experience of watching John Frankenheimer's 2002 HBO telefilm Path to War? Does this study of Lyndon B. Johnson's escalation of the war in Vietnam reduce possibly the major international crime of the Cold War era into a vaguely pretentious study of an allegedly complicated man? Who knows? I don't. I've seen this film. This is my second time viewing it. I'm an admirer of John Frankenheimer's work, which I feel has been established on this program. His ability to compose filmic classics out of others' screenplays and stories is utterly superlative, from his days directing live television plays to the visual sleekness of his major 1960s thriller pictures. There was always a flair for realizing a dramatic tension between players among Frankenheimer's films. HBO really had their thinking caps on when they realized Frankenheimer would be the most perfectly suited choice to helm a 1960s set political crisis narrative, reliant on dialogue, and yet with an emphasis on the visual depictions of events, on intensive, unforgettable mental associations to accompany the tensions being discussed amongst the film itself. Given how Frankenheimer had handled fictional conflicts taking place amongst a White House administration, say 7 Days in May, and then, prior to Path to War, had been executing large-scale historical productions for television, such as Against the Wall, The Burning Season, Andersonville, and George Wallace, there really was no better candidate for this job. And it is directed superbly. Who is going to deny that now? So let's instead discuss the ethics of the film even existing. To what extent is this film attempting to defend Lyndon Johnson, if at all? It is possible that by portraying any historical figure as complicated, one is defending them from accusations of evil or something. Personally, I'm not really interested in very binary concepts like evil, although I am interested in a consistent application of ethical considerations. Sakharov depicted Adolf Hitler as a pitiful loon within 1999's Moloch, to the upset of several, no doubt, inevitably when dealing with such an extremely sensitive subject. Although in no way did it take away from the seriousness of the atrocities which Hitler was responsible for, in my opinion. I'm not trying to equivocate Lyndon Johnson with Adolf Hitler as such, and certainly neither is Frankenheimer. In fact, this film, Path to War, most certainly is making the case that LBJ with a magic wand would have had no Vietnam War at all, and an America which solely focused on building up his Great Society programs. But would it have been less biased, more nuanced, to simply have depicted LBJ as though he were a Hitler? Again, I would be interested in the Vietnamese perspective on a film such as this because I feel as though it is important. Is it profane to speak of someone who caused so much quantitative suffering in anything but binary terms of moral evil? Hard to say. In my opinion, Lyndon B. Johnson is an inevitably complex figure, even when considering his life's attributes. Whilst practically progressive on civil rights issues in the United States, some say that he was still a private racist. He was known to be somewhat or outright bullying toward anyone he felt he could intimidate, and like most politicians, he was probably very corrupt somewhere down the line. Sometimes given a pass due to his domestic legislation, and so mildly forgiven for his war crimes in Indochina, LBJ has an interesting historiography. Michael Gambon really sells this depiction of LBJ as a nuanced mortal to the point wherein it makes one second guess their perception of the man. One is so convinced they are watching Lyndon Johnson, it becomes a matter of correcting one's own assumptions about the historic figure upon writing an assessment for the overall film. As for Alec Baldwin's portrayal of Robert McNamara, it feels slightly cartoonish, frankly. An impressive performance, an interesting character, although insofar as it is meant to depict an historical figure, something feels off. Maybe someone who knew McNamara at the time might feel differently, although this performance has the vibe of being a caricature or an impression of some kind. Donald Sutherland as the lesser-known Clark Clifford, one of the Democratic Party's major advisors around this era, just comes across as Donald Sutherland to me. I don't have any basis of who Clark Clifford is to say whether Sutherland's portrayal is really apt or not, but I think Sutherland being such an iconic actor almost ensures every role he plays to be that of Donald Sutherland, somewhat. Well, if one is interested in the zeitgeist on display in Path to War, do check it out. This is no gung-ho garbage. It attempts to display the events that occurred with honesty, although some might consider it not quite honest enough. Maybe depicting these murderous proceedings as a series of seemingly complicated decisions within the United States Department of Defense is an act of moral blindness in and of itself. Again, this is the kind of picture which a Vietnamese perspective on would be insightful, assuming such an individual would even want to give it the time of day. Still, I think Path to War attempts to honestly squeeze in the events of recorded history within an engaging educational drama, and while its directorial finesse is undeniable, its ultimate sensitivity is plausibly worth debating. In any case, have a terrific day, everyone. Seriously.